begin to come into a time of meditation, knowing that there is nothing required of us, for all that we are, all that we need, all that we might want is already present within us as the full capacity of God, the faculties, the love, the wisdom, the life force energy, the discernment, the zeal. I'm going to ask you as we move into meditation to put your focus and your awareness on your heart center. That visible center of an invisible energy we call love. Love, that energy that wants nothing but the best for another person. And include yourself in that, such that you're wanting the absolute best for you. And breathing into that, allowing your awareness to rest there in your heart center. Knowing that you are love, the very essence of love. Allowing that knowing to filter down into your energy so that it goes from our head to our heart. And then moves into each and every cell of our body, radiating from our heart. Joining and mingling with each heart who's present here and each one who's not. For in our oneness we are everywhere. And give a moment's attention to that which feels unlovable in you. Allowing the energy of love to harmonize, to heal, to infuse. Begin to make the very shifts that you most desire so that you can let anything that's unlike your wholeness simply fall away. And you can see the divine that you are. And we take these thoughts into the sacred and holy silence. Gently and easily and quietly say to yourself, I am love. I am loved. My divine nature is love. Now say it out loud, a little bit quietly, but a little bit louder, but out loud. I am love. I am loved. And my divine nature is love. I'm going to ask you to return to this moment and turn to somebody and say, you are love. So you are love. turn to somebody else and say, you are loved. And then as a group, let's say to each other, our divine nature is love. So that is the truth of us. So I want to talk to you today about standing in the gap. This is a phrase from Ezekiel, standing in the gap. Ezekiel was a prophet of God. And at the time that he was doing his prophecy, the Israelites were in the city of Jerusalem, and the Babylonians were coming. But the Israelites were having a really good time. They were out partying and playing, and they were worshiping other gods, which, as you may remember, God said, you shall have no other God before me. But the Israelites were out playing, and they were having a really good time. And the prophet Ezekiel had been coming, and they had been saying, the Babylonians are coming. There's an army that is coming, and they're going to conquer us. And I don't know if you've ever been having a good time, and somebody says, you need to do something different, and you're like, oh, no, I don't want to do that. Have you ever had that experience? Oh, I'm having a good time. I don't want to change what I'm doing. Even if there's someone saying you need to do something different. And this is what Ezekiel was saying to his people. You need to do something different. And what happened was eventually the Babylonians showed up. And in the times of the Israelites, the cities had walls around them. And most of these walls were ancient. And so some of the stones and the bricks had been falling off of the walls. And as they fell off of the walls, people would come and gather them. Instead of placing them back, they would take them home and repair their own homes. So you can imagine how easily it was that the Babylonians then were able to enter the city of Jerusalem to capture the Israelites. And then because they wanted to get their point across, they exiled them, because it's much easier if you don't have a group of people who are aware of what's going on in the city present, and you exile them, it's much easier to take over. So this was what's going on when this idea that Ezekiel was sharing was coming forth. And I want to show you the passage. It's in Ezekiel 22:30. And it says, I looked for a man among them who would build up the wall and stand before me in the gap on behalf of the land, so I would not have to destroy it, but I found none. And this is what God was sharing through Ezekiel. I'm looking for somebody to stand in the gap, so I do not have to destroy it, so the land can be maintained. But Ezekiel is saying, I didn't find anybody. Well, as we know, all of these stories, this is from the Hebrew Scriptures, all of the stories in the Bible can teach us something about ourselves. They can teach us how we are with other people. And oftentimes, we are called to stand in the gap for someone else. We call it prayer quite frequently. We call it meditation. We also call it being able to hold sacred space for someone. So when we are standing in the gap with someone, we are holding sacred space. So metaphysically, when we look at to stand, to hold fearlessly to the truth that Spirit is doing its perfect work and there is no cause for worry. To know that Spirit is doing its perfect work. So even in the midst of what was going on with the Israelites and the Babylonians, Spirit is doing its perfect work. In the midst of knowing that we might be conquered, Spirit was doing its perfect work. And if we think about this metaphysically, the wall represents our mind. So sometimes there are gaps in our mind in how we allow Spirit to do our perfect work. And we're not actually taking the stand, but we're living in the cause of worry, even though we know that there is no cause for worry. If we look at the city of Jerusalem, it's peace within, metaphysically, and the Babylonians are chaos. So how can this story from thousands of years ago relate to us right here and right now? Where are we in chaos? I have moments of it. I wish I didn't. But I still have moments of it. I had a moment of it on Friday when somebody came into my office, shared some information, and then left. There was no ability or time for conversation. He was just like, I have to go. And I found my mind spinning. And I had to come back and be a stand in consciousness for knowing that whatever is occurring, there is good within it. And it took me a few moments to do that. I had to refocus my mind. I had to bring my awareness and my attention back to my heart. I had to remember that when something is good for one person, it's good for all people. And that my job is to begin to look for the good in it. So in the middle of what felt like chaos to me, my challenge for a moment, and another moment, was to look for the good in what was occurring. And to take a breath. And to be a stand for remembering this very thing, that truth that Spirit is doing its perfect work, and there is no cause for worry. Now, we have a lot of examples in the Bible about Spirit doing its perfect work. Joseph saved his family from starvation by bringing them to Egypt. That is Spirit doing its perfect work. Moses asked God to spare the Hebrews, and Esther prayed and fasted for her people to save them from Haman. So there are many instances, but I think that we're called many times to be doing Spirit's perfect work with each other when we bring it home. And part of how we do that is to practice the principle of seeking the good in all things. Seeking the good in anything that's occurring and being willing to notice when our mind has wandered off and bring it back to seeking the good. And notice when our mind has wandered off and bring it back to seeking the good. The researchers show us and tell us that we have about 4 seconds worth of presence, that we can focus our attention about 4 seconds. I actually believe if you're engaging in regular practice of meditation, that 4 seconds expands. And I believe that there are many ways to refocus our attention. Music does it. And when we sing together, our hearts begin to harmonize. We refocus our attention in meditation. When I was first beginning to meditate, I would light a candle, and I would look at the flame of the candle, and I would start to notice when I was getting all jittery. And I would stand up and I would take a few breaths and I would sit down and I'd focus on that candle again. And then I'd notice my mind was off wandering somewhere and I'd bring it back. And as I continued this practice, I began to see that I could focus on the flame of the candle for longer and longer periods of time. It wasn't always easy. The same with meditation. I can remember the first time I decided I was going to meditate for 5 whole minutes. I set the timer. I'm sitting in the chair. I thought of 50,000 things I should be doing instead of meditating. And then I was wiggling. I was agitated and wiggling. But I made myself sit there so I would train my body that I was going to do what I said I was going to do. So I'm training my body and I'm training my mind. So the next day, same thing. I resisted it. I don't know about you guys. I resisted it for a period of time. And I finally said, okay, I have to sit down and meditate. So I put the timer on. I sat in the chair. And I was there probably about 5 more seconds before I got all wiggly and my mind was spinning and I wanted to do something else. But I continued to do this day after day after day until at some point 5 minutes didn't feel like 5 hours. Standing in the gap for myself. Choosing to move through something that felt very uncomfortable for me because I knew Spirit was doing its perfect work in me. I had just started attending Unity, and I was desiring to follow the principles, desiring to engage in the practice, because what I was finding was that in my heart, as I would do that, I was changing the way I saw myself, but changing the way I saw other people too. And I was noticing that I had more joy in my life. I was noticing that life was flowing easier. And that when I was willing to do the practice of meditation, when I was willing to do the practice of prayer, my life, when the bumps would come, when the obstacles would show up, because you know when we make a big commitment, the obstacle is going to show up to say, do you mean it? So when that would happen, if I would be a stand for myself, if I would stand in the gap, then I would be able to move through the obstacle with less trepidation, with much greater ease. And as I continue to do this, even though there will still be obstacles, even though there's still times that I have to stand in the gap for myself, when I'm willing to do that, things unfold much easier. Now, Myrtle Fillmore says that our secret of our power to help others lies in our refusing to be moved by the appearances and the apparent lacks that are reported to us, and in our steadfastly holding to the truth of being and declaring the working out of the constructive thoughts and words we have sent forth. That's where our power is. Remembering in the moment that it's not totally us that's doing something. That as we have practiced, we are standing more fully in our divine nature. As we have engaged in the practice, we're able to recognize that we don't have to be moved by the appearance. We don't have to engage in worry. We don't have to be bringing our energy down through fear. But we can stand in the gap for ourselves. And as we learn to stand in the gap for ourselves, it's much easier to stand in the gap for another person. First, we must begin to do it for ourselves, to really engage in that practice. And as we do so, we do exactly what Mrs. Fillmore says. We recognize that we don't need to pour out our own energy, because we begin to see the energy of the God self, of spirit within each other. And we recognize that each of us have the full capacity of God within us. And we begin to recognize that all we have to do is see it. And sometimes that's the most difficult. To be able to hear that somebody has a diagnosis and see beyond that diagnosis to the Spirit and the presence of God acting in their life. That is them. And to stand in the gap with them. To bring our attention and our awareness back to that knowing that within each of us, ourselves and each other, there is that inner guidance that will lead us into exactly what the next right step is for us. But sometimes when we're not able to hold that vision for somebody, we move into worry. And so we have to remember, just as the Israelites allowed for gaps to come into their wall, which is representative of mind, that we have to look for and seek out the gaps that have come into our mind, our representative wall, and to bridge them with each other. To be the support that when one of us is struggling with who we are, when one of us is struggling with some news that we received or a feeling that we're having within us, that the rest of us can be the support and hold the vision and see the perfection of what is happening and know that Spirit is doing its perfect work in our lives, in everybody's life. What happens is when we move into worry for somebody, we begin to move our frequency into the frequency of worry. And the frequency of worry comes out of our solar plexus. And what happens as soon as we go into worry is neurotransmitters in our brains begin to secrete chemicals, which then look at secreting chemicals that are neuropeptides. And this cascade of hormones and sometimes moves through our body and activates this center. And so what we begin to do is have more worry thoughts. And the more we have worry thoughts, the more worry thoughts are going to come. And the more we have worry thoughts, we're magnetizing even more worry thoughts to us. But when we rest our attention with love, and we know that love is the master healer, the master harmonizer, when we rest our attention on our solar plexus with love, we change the frequency. So when we rest with worry, then we create these chemicals in our bodies that actually clog us up and reduce our aura. But when we rest our attention on our solar plexus with love, then what happens is, in time, our energy fields expand. This is one of the reasons when we come together and we actually are in each other's energy fields, because our energy fields extend about 3 feet beyond us. So if you hold out your hands or your arms, you have a circumference that's about 9 feet across. And then when I come into your energy field and I'm coming in with love, you're going to feel that. There's going to be a resonance for you. And this is a big piece of what Myrtle Fillmore is talking about. When I come in with worry, some part of you is going to get that. It's going to understand that. It may not be conscious, but you're going to realize that there's something going on. And if you notice that, all we have to do is bring our attention and our awareness back into our hearts. And when we do that and rest it gently on our hearts, when we breathe, as the song said, breathe love in and out through our hearts, then what we do is we bring our heart back into coherence, which allows our brains to come back into coherence, which allows us to release the worry. Step by step by step, little by little, but it takes a practice, a very gentle and easy practice, where the only thing that's really required of us is to rest our attention, because we know where our attention is, that's where our energy is going to go. And when we rest our attention someplace and allow our energy to be there, and we allow it to be there with love, then love heals that part of us. Love embraces the worry. Love allows us to stand in the gap for each other and to be steadfast, to hold to the truth of our being, which is that we are divine. This is the step by step. See the Christ presence in everyone. See the divinity in everyone. Whatever word works best for you. To be willing to go through it. When I was first on the spiritual path, I started reading Deepak Chopra. And I noticed as I was beginning to read these books that I was pretty judgmental. I'm still judgmental, but I'm not quite as judgmental as I was at that time. I was unaware that I was actually on a spiritual path. I just knew I had a longing for something, and that longing was coming through. And as I would meet people, they would offer me ideas and suggestions. And I love books, and I love to talk about books, so quite often people would give me books. And they would give me cassette tapes, so that tells you about how long ago it was. But they would give me cassette tapes, and I would listen to them, and I'd listen again and again and again. And one of Deepak Chopra's books, what he said was, every person that you meet, when you pass them, just think, I love you. So I began to do that. Every person I passed, I would think, I love you. I love you. So what I noticed, and what I began to notice, that instead of my mind being filled with worry of what I was going to do that day, I was passing a lot of people. I was living in New York City. I was passing a lot of people. And so my thoughts were constantly, I love you, I love you, I love you, I love you. And I noticed that that began to change my very physiology. That it was easier to love. That it was easier to love myself and other people. It was easier to begin to see something different in them. Now, I had not come into unity, and I would not at that time have called it the Christ presence. But here we go. Spirit was doing its perfect work in me, leading me to the next right step. and the next right step. Well, it was probably 10 years after that when I discovered Unity and went into the very first service and cried because I had found that longing in my heart was being fulfilled, and that love that I was seeking and that love that I had been expanding by doing the work of Deepak Chopra, I had found a home for it. So as I see somebody in difficulty, I can hear what they're sharing with me. I can listen deeply. And the greatest gift that I can give them is not to come to the lower frequency, not to come down to the frequency of worry, but to bring my attention to my heart and to listen from my heart. So often I will actually touch my heart as a reminder to be able to listen from that frequency. So what I'm giving out is I can stand in the gap, and instead of being someone who takes the rocks away, I can be someone who begins to fill in the gap. And you are here today, so I know that you are somebody who has been filling in the gap, who has been standing in the gap for other people. We can choose love and let wisdom be our guide. Charles Fillmore puts love and wisdom together in the 12 powers. He says that love without wisdom actually is hubris. That love needs to have wisdom to help us make discerning choices of what to do and how to be. That sometimes love says yes and sometimes love says no. But love always comes forth with harmony. Love always comes forth with wanting the highest and the best. So one of the ways that we can know whether we're in a state of love is, are we bringing our wisdom with us, and are we wanting the absolute best for another? In our oneness, we're following what Jesus says when Jesus said to us and said to his disciples, it's the Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom, which means it's God's good pleasure to give you all the good that you can receive. And so as we do that, as we come from a place of love, as we desire the highest and best as we can in any given moment for somebody, then we are bringing forth the kingdom of heaven through us, because that's who and what we are, and inviting other people to step into it and to take hold of it. But we don't have to pour ourselves out for it. We're simply the very invitation by our very life and the way we're living it. And finally, to pray with each other regularly. To spend time in prayer. That doesn't always mean we have to be together doing it. We do that here on Sunday mornings. We do that at other times when we meet together during the week. But Charles and Myrtle Fillmore had a regular time that they prayed and meditated together. And many people joined them from wherever they were in their own homes. So finding a regular time to pray and meditate with each other. And the beautiful thing is we make up time, so it doesn't even have to be at exactly the same time. We hold that intention, we hold that oneness in our hearts, and we're holding that love in our hearts, then we are standing in the gap for each other. Praying without ceasing. And recognizing that as we learn to live from that consciousness of love, that we are raising the very vibration of the planet. This is what I am passionate about right now. And this is what my invitation for each of you is to be able to find the place in you that you can rest your awareness and your attention in a way that helps your heart come into balance. Coherence is another word for balance. To allow your heart to come into balance. And as our hearts come into balance, our brains come into balance. Our minds come into balance. And as that occurs, we're able to allow Spirit to do its good work within us, for we are Spirit. And we're balancing out that gap that we sometimes have between our personality self and our spiritual self. our personality self and our divinity. Unity talks about it as our individuality, but as our divinity. And as we balance that process of heart to mind, heart to brain, as we close the gaps in our mind and live more fully in principle, then we're in more and greater balance. And what unfolds is greater ease. What unfolds is the heart-to-heart connection that we begin to build with each other, and that radiates forth so that when we meet people in all the different places that we go, people know there's something different about you.
Absolutely.
I'm sure that you have all heard that. And when people walk into this room, there's something different here. There's a consciousness, there's an energy here that's been building, that's been layering up. And as people walk in, hearts begin to open as we continue to hold our hearts open. So my invitation to you across this week is, as you move through your very busy weeks, as you go to all the different places that you go, rest your attention on your heart. Just simply rest it there. And as you interact with people, notice what happens. Quite often, things will calm down in the room where you're in. Things will even out. Quite often, the interactions change. And so there's this moment of absolute connection between you and the other person that's tangible in the room.
Happens to me all the time.
Yeah, it happens to you all the time. So when we're doing that, we are truly being the presence of God. We are living as the presence of God, and we are changing the very essence and vibration of the planet. Thank you. Thank you.